Warm greetings from the Center for National Security Studies. I'm your host, Bala Subramanian, Senior Research Officer and Head of the Strategic Studies Program at CNSS. Today, we are in a conversation with our distinguished guest, Mr. Paul Szymanski, President, Space Strategy Center, US. Mr. Szymanski has 50 years experience in all fields related to space warfare, policy, strategy, simulations, surveillance, survivability, threat assessment, long-range strategic planning, and command and control. In addition, he has a comprehensive experience base, having worked directly with multiple services, US Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, civil agencies like NASA, DARPA, and FEMA, and also including from the White House, National Security Council, and Congress to the Pentagon, to the Secretary of the Air Force. A warm welcome, Mr. Paul, and thank you very much for taking time to be with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoy doing these discussions. I mean, it's certainly a very critical area lately, though there's been, to my estimation, at least 11 space wars or attacks since the 1960s. And there was a lot going on in Ukraine and continuing. And I have no direct knowledge, but I'm sure something's happening in the Middle East too, related to space.
Thank you, sir. Let me start my first question by speaking about two major powers. One is the US and the evolving power China, who are intensifying their space program. How do you think their strategies for space control differ, and what recent developments highlight these distinctions?
Well, the latest in thing among a lot of countries is what's called rendezvous and proximity operations, RPO or RPOD for docking. And so everyone seems to want to, do what everyone else is doing around the block, so to speak. And so they have what I call inspector satellites, maintenance satellites, repair satellites, whatever you want to call it. And in some sense, it's an ideal space weapon because it's the equivalent of taking a satellite, putting it in a wheelbarrow, reeling it into your garage, and going at it. Well, let's drill this hole, let's cut this wire, let's saw this, let's bend that, let's pull it out of orbit and all that. So I've been on 5 different satellite inspector programs, and this is where a satellite comes up close, kisses it, so to speak, or maybe is a few kilometers away, but it's monitoring signals. Or you can just, if you see which way the satellite is pointed, if it's an imagery satellite, you can estimate what target it's interested in. So you can get a lot of information. You could maybe put on a space mine that you detonate years later or something, if you can get the balance right and stuff like that. So it's a unique capability. The United States proudly talks about the 6 they have up there. Russia has a few, I don't know how many, but they, I think the French were complaining about them getting too close to their military satellites. And then China has a bunch of them. I don't know how many, but they've done things like, I think it was maybe about 2 years ago. They had one of their GPS navigational kind of satellites. They have some in medium Earth orbit and some in geosynchronous. And I'm sorry, the name escapes me, but they claimed that this satellite was launched and was immediately broke and is drifting around the geosynchronous belt. And so they said, well, this is too dangerous. And so we're going to grab a hold of it. We'll use one of these RPO maintenance satellites, whatever you want to call it. It has mechanical arms. They proudly talked about this, and grab a hold of the satellite and bring it to what's called graveyard orbit. So that's what's in the news. But I sort of know where the skeletons are buried, or maybe I'm just a suspicious type. And I look at that, and graveyard orbit is what is it, plus or minus 300 kilometers above or below geosynchronous. They towed it to 3,000 kilometers, 10 times the amount. And fuel is everything in space. That's the most valuable asset you have. So why are you going 10 times further? Why did you wait to maneuver it out of the way when it was out of the way of United States space surveillance assets, you know? And why did you wait till now instead of years ago and so forth? And then there's one thing that surprisingly countries, people don't cover up. They cover up with lies a lot. Countries are just like children. They'll lie to their parents to get away with things. And, that's the way humans are. But they never seem to lie about simultaneity. And that is, oh, some big thing happens in the world. And 2 days later, another big thing happens. And it's kind of correlated, guys, probably 90% probability, because the very definition of civilization is reduce drama in your life, and all these dramatic things are happening. So, at any rate, the Chinese started pulling this supposedly dead satellite 2 days after the United States launched two more of its own inspection satellites. Now, that's kind of suspicious. And so, are they trying to get rid of the evidence, in one way or the other? So, okay. Now, I believe, and I'm rather certain of this, that they faked the death of this satellite, and it actually was an inspector satellite. It wasn't a navigational satellite or anything like that. And it was drifting around the geosynchronous belt, inspecting everyone's satellites and stuff like that. And then when the gig was up, they decided to pull it way beyond where they had to keep it away from the United States sensors. Now, why would I believe that? Well, 35 years ago, I was on a program to do that very same thing. A spent rocket stage drifting around the geosynchronous belt was not dead. Now, the program was canceled and all that, but nothing's kind of new under the sun. So, what I'm getting at is the US has these satellites to go close. China has them, Russia has them. I don't think India has them, though they probably will want to do it someday. And so there's this little a cat and mouse game going on in space, I'm sure, all the time, especially during conflict. Maybe they're messing with satellites and killing them, not blowing them up, but cyber attacks or, there's things like it's very difficult to cool off a satellite. It's not like you have ground you're going to attach it to and all that. And it's heating up. And so it has these radiators that go out into very deep space, which is minus 100, whatever, degrees. Well, what if you had one of these inspection satellites and just paint those radiators so they no longer radiate out and the satellite kind of dies on its own? Or you paint the optics of the sensors, or you put some sort of, let's say, microfiber electrostatic material all around the antennas, and suddenly they can't communicate. I mean, I just coming up with these things. So there's all this messing going around now. That's good news and bad news. Space is tens of thousands of kilometers away, and you could sometimes kind of directly image a satellite, but you can play all these games in space and get away with it. And so that's kind of bad, but then that's kind of good because it provides additional rungs on a conflict escalation ladder where you can show intent, resolve, and will on each other in space and don't make the general populace get all upset. They don't know about it and force you into war. I mean, I hear like in World War I, the British government didn't really care about going to war against Germany. It's like, oh, that's just another Franco-Prussian war that happened in 1870s. They're just trying to get their territory back. But what we call the yellow press here kept saying, oh, those evil Germans bayoneting babies and stuff like that, and so forced the British government to go to war. And 60 million dead later. And oh, by the way, World War II is an extension of World War I, another 80 million there. So, maybe war in space is good. I mean, you get to the point where it's almost like one of those 1960s Star Trek movies that, oh, you fight out in space and whoever loses no sense fighting on the ground, guys, and you're not killing anyone in space. You don't have to attack the International Space Station. And I have a whole briefing of 100 ways how to attack satellites without creating space debris. So maybe I'm being Machiavellian here. So getting back to that, I have no direct knowledge. Well, besides that, now let me tell you about something else. Most people don't know why there is a U.S. Space Force. And I was in France 2.5 years ago at the invitation of the French Air and Space Force. I spent a week there lecturing, and two French lieutenant colonels in their Space Force essentially told me why there's a U.S. Space Force. And they said, I think it was in 2017, a Chinese, what I call a manipulator satellite, with the arms, same thing that pulled their satellite out of the way, attacked an American missile warning satellite and tore it apart. And it's like, my gosh, now it's like extremely stupid because it seems to me if you're about to go to nuclear war, um, you take out the eyes and ears in space of your adversary so they can't see how many missiles you're shooting and where they're going and which explosions and all that. So those should be sacrosanct. You don't get anywhere near those because you don't want to make the other guy get an itchy trigger finger and start a nuclear war where you're just going up and taking a look or something. So why did China attack an American missile warning satellite? No, that's the trouble. I don't know. I'm sure they didn't do it for the fun of it. It's probably something the U.S. did. Probably the U.S. did something afterwards. It's like in the Middle East, tit for tat. Oh, we're really mad at you and all this. Uh, so that's kind of what's happening. Now, I remember years ago reading an unclassified um, Chinese doctrine on space warfare, and they related it to uh, the viewpoint of the Germans in World War II. And the Allies, the Western Allies in World War II, had 17 times more tanks than the Germans, and they had better tanks. And so the Chinese are saying, well, we should do a lightning strike in space and take out the US's capabilities quickly before they understand what's happening and come attack us back. The same like the Germans blitzkrieg, knock them out really fast, because we'll lose anyway. So I don't know how true that is as far as military doctrine. I get the impression in general, China takes the longer view and maybe the more strategic view. And I know for a fact, I mean, I've known first lieutenants through general officers and like in the US Space Force and all that. And they just keep thinking tactically. They're not thinking strategically. And space, by definition, is strategic. It covers the world. Are you going to take out commercial satellites? You're at war in the Middle East. You don't want Iran to see the disposition of Israeli troops. Um, but you can maybe use laser blinders and blind the satellites come over, but they can download that information, the Iranians, from a commercial terminal in Thailand or India. Now, are you going to go bomb that terminal? No. And it's going to go via submarine cable back to the Middle East, probably to Iran. I guess they have submarine cables. Are you going to blow up the submarine cable? Maybe, but probably not. But you're suddenly talking about World War. You don't have to attack a satellite in theater. You can attack it in the South Atlantic, anywhere down its orbital path. So you're kind of stupid if you don't think of space as strategic. And they keep thinking tactical, like, oh, the satellite's coming close to me and it takes days and weeks, and I'm gonna shoot back or start spinning or maneuver out of the way. Well, what if there's 100 satellites coming at you? What is their doctrine, their goals? Is it what's called decapitation, going against command and control? Are you going against imagery? Are they going against, say, GPS navigational? Is it like I remember in some of those pre-1973 Israeli-Arab conflicts, the Arabs would rush all their troops to the border and stop. And Israel would have to, everyone would have to stop their jobs and man their tanks and all, and ruin the economy and all that. Well, is that the same in space? You come really close and say, ha ha, and do nothing. Now, do you start a war over that? And by the time they've gotten close, it's too late for you to do something too. So you have to think of that bigger picture. What are they doing and why are they doing it? And then what are the consequences? And that's what they're not thinking. The United States has been very bad. They keep fighting all these little battles and losing the war, or maybe winning the war, but losing the peace. And so the whole point of war, and I've gotten old enough to understand, is not killing things and people and blowing things up. And even the ancient Greeks understood this. It's to make them change their mind, ultimately. So you're not really talking about war in space. Space is generating information and transmitting it. So you're really talking about an information war. So you're not attacking the satellite, you're attacking the information. And you're not even attacking the information, you're attacking the adversary commander's mind that is using that information. And you can sit there and think, oh, gee, I'm going to do a laser blinder and deny his ability to image the battlefield. And I'm sure he'll attack left versus right. Well, how do you know? You can't mathematically model an adversary commander's mind. Maybe it's some crusty old general who doesn't believe in space information anyway or stuff. So if you had, let's say, $100 million extra in your budget 1 year, should you apply it to some fancy new space weapon or re-equip an army brigade with better tanks? Because ultimately, what is the effect on the battlefield? That's all that really matters. And I'm going to be a heretic here or something, but there's no colonies in space that the Space Force is defending. The whole point of what they're doing is supporting what's happening on the ground, the army. Ultimately, they have to go in, they have to conquer territory, and so you can't sit there and say, I'm going to kill these satellites. Well, why? And you have to coordinate with the army. Well, we're going to kill this satellite because the army's attacking tomorrow. And we don't want to deny this information, confusion on the battle. You have to have that all sort of figured out together. And I don't know how well they've done that. And I haven't worked directly in these programs for 12 years. I've been retired. But getting back to winning all the battles but losing the war, you can sit there and say, oh, look I killed all the adversary satellites. I won. But you created all this space debris. And suddenly all your allies hate you. And then all these treaties after the war are made against you. And oh, by the way, a lot of these systems like cyber weapons use once and then the adversary knows about it and you can't use them again. So maybe you should hold some back. Maybe you should be shaping the post-conflict battlefield of who the allies are, what is their perceptions, what possible treaties will come later, because it's like in Ukraine. All we did is train the Russians to fight us better next time. When you really get down to it, I even theorized you could be very political and say, we're going to war with North Korea or something. Let's get the stupidest Korean space general and let him win a few minor battles. So his politicians would say, oh, this guy really is great, and all that. And make sure that his doctrine survives post-war. You can really play those games, I think, the psychological warfare, instead of just being, oh, I got this big red button, I got to push it. I really want to blow up that satellite because it feels good. Well, why are you doing it? And I don't think they're exactly thinking that through. And going back to Arab, no, the Iranian Israeli thing. Well, it's all emotion now. Like, oh, you killed my people, I'm going to kill yours, and it's the animal emotions. And I get the sense, and I'm not an expert in China, but they're more into the longer picture, and so they wait things out, I suppose. So I'm sure, well, they attacked American satellites, so they'll probably attack, the U.S. probably attacks more. But did we go to war? Did we drop bombs on China over that? Good, we didn't. And then this is further than the doctrine strategy, but it's like, maybe you know Chinese history more than me, but when in the last time over the last 1,000 years did China do a major invasion and conquer a country? I don't think ever. Taiwan's kind of theirs, guys, really. Uh, when's the last time China won a war?
The last time was with Vietnam. In the 1970s, they went
I
into Vietnam.
suppose, though I think the Russians supported more because the Chinese and the North Vietnamese hate each other, I thought. But maybe, yeah, supporting it, not directly. So, yeah, you could argue back and forth. But the U.S. has been doing all these wars every 20 to 25 years over the last 250 years. They have a war. So they get kind of expert at this. In some sense, the British, I think there's 80-90% of the sea captains around the world are British because, well, they've been doing it 500-600 years. There's a certain culture that builds up. And so China could say, oh, we're going to build these aircraft carriers and we're going to, this and that. And it was the same with Japan in World War II. They built these super battleships that they didn't anneal the armor quite right, and they didn't do this right. And, there's all these little subtle things that don't come out on paper exactly. So in space, well, of course, there hasn't been a really big space war. So who could claim has more knowledge? I contend it's almost luck who has the better general. But like with most societies, and possibly even more so in China, it's all groupthink. And so space war is such a new thing. You need new people. You need young people. The U.S. Space Force, 90% of them, 95% of them are U.S. Air Force who just changed their badges. Okay, I could do a thought experiment and say, when's the last time the air war was in doubt for the U.S. Air Force? Maybe early World War II, now late World War II, Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, and never. And so there's a certain degree of lazy thinking, I would think, that would have been built up, that I think I detect. Now, I can't claim I know everything that's going on at the U.S. Space Force. Sure, they got a lot of cool weapon systems. I worked on 12 different ones on that. And then you see things, and again, I'm going over the sort of the psychological things, but you see the military ads. I've seen comparisons. For China, they have 10,000 soldiers marching, and you're one little guy in there, and you feel safe being with all these 10,000 soldiers. And then you look at the military ads for American Army, and they have John Wayne, I'm killing everyone, I'm a big tough guy. And so there's a psychology of group think versus individualism. And so I theorized that if you're going against, let's say, a dictatorship, the soldiers tend to freeze in the battlefield if they can't get commands from their commanders because they don't want to get shot. So if you're doing a space war against a dictatorship, maybe like China, a groupthink like China, maybe you should attack command and control, communication satellites, things like that. Whereas if you're fighting in Europe, I remember in World War II, I'm sorry, I was born right over right after World War II. I remember some of the German generals saying, those damn Americans, they don't even follow their military manuals. And I know, I've talked to them. And if you cut them off of their commanders in Eastern Europe, they're going to just keep fighting, whatever. So maybe if you're going to a war in Europe, maybe you should pre-position space weapons that blind imagery satellites stuff. I mean, you got to think these things through, and that's why I've been proposing we really need a space warfare think tank with retired generals and State Department people, all this, because it's bigger than just military, to sort of go through these things. Like, is defense better than offense? What sort of satellites should you take out first? How do you define winning in space? Both sides could say, oh, I won. I took out all your communication satellites. And the other side, oh, I took out all your imagery. I won. Well, who's correct? I don't know because it's information. So I don't know. blowing a lot of steam here and all that. But so I would think I could be biased here and say it'd be easier to defeat China because of lack of original thinking. But then I could argue against myself and say, well, the US has been doing space for 70 years or whatever. They've gotten set in their ways, where some country, maybe like India, is just starting fresh. They're more attuned to new ideas. So it's not the equipment, but how you use it that really matters. And I have an even bigger theory going on here, and that is herders versus farmers. And have you ever seen milk, cheese in Chinese food? No. 90% of them are lactose intolerant because it's a farming based culture, even genetics, whatever, where Europe, it was more herder based, small family groups herding horses and drinking their milk and stuff like that. So 90% of them can drink milk and stuff like that. And there's a map you can see on online on the internet, all the battles that have happened around the world for the past 5,000 years. And 90% of them are in Europe. Those guys really like war and they're really good at it. So I don't know if any of this is true. And wars, you're never quite sure what's going to happen. But that's my take on doctrine. And I can't claim to know specific doctrine. And I've seen silly things too with the Air Force. Years ago, I remember going to some big meeting and they're saying, well, if Russia or China starts developing anti-satellite systems, we'll see it in training manuals and in this and that. And I says, I was on the F-15 anti-satellite program in the 80s at the Pentagon, and we had no training manuals. We didn't have any courses. We didn't have anything. We just had it, And so you can easily fool yourself. If you're a very intelligent person, you can get overly enamored with your own intelligence and fool yourself. It's going to go this way and that way and that way, and it never does on that. So good luck. That's all I can say.
During the course of the response, you mentioned about the cat and mouse game. Speaking of the cat and mouse game, let me take you a little bit about the geospatial intelligence, which is very crucial for the space situational awareness. What advancements in geospatial technologies have emerged, and how do you think they are enhancing the surveillance capability for countries like the US?
So I understand geospatial intelligence to be satellites looking at the ground. So that's not space domain awareness or space situational awareness. That's, I don't know, GeoInt or something like that. It's funny, I've seen at least 3 times people saying the war in Ukraine that Elon Musk Starlink was really a war winner, and that's communication. But I always thought it must be the imagery. And they've always emphasized communication every time I was working with a space thing. But you always think, well, pictures worth 1,000 words, and you can see where the forces are. I mean, if you look at Israel and how did they know how to kill those 15 different general officers without space, seeing pictures of where they live, but probably even more so signals intelligence, car radios or something that they can pick up. So I would think if you're able to deny geo intelligence, that should be a war winner as far as I can see. Though people keep talking about the communications being a war winner, but more on the tactical level of things. But I believe the United States probably has the best imagery satellites and all. So they've been telling the Ukrainians where to attack. They probably told the Israelis where to attack. Because I know Israel has a few satellites up there, but I mean, they come over and it's a 6 to 7 minute pass and it's gone, So you need a lot of them. And the U.S. has been doing that since the 60s. So I guess maybe even more important is having good friends, for battles, having the right allies. Though I would think in the Ukrainian conflict, Russia has a lot too. And actually, it's right next door to them, and it was their territory just 30 plus years ago. So they know where everything's at. It's not like they have to figure out where the roads are. They built them and all that, which is probably different than Israel versus Iran. So GAN, yeah, I always felt that was the number one. Now, I remember, I don't know if it's still true, but years ago, United States satellite imagery companies weren't allowed to take images of Israel. They have these little things like that. Though it appears to me, if you're a company based in France, no one's stopping you, I don't think, you know. And so there's all these commercial imagery satellites that you really can't stop. I mean, there's obviously tens of them, maybe 40 or 50. I haven't really counted it out. You're not going to attack all of those. And then, the political consequences. Now, maybe you could do the laser blinding. I mean, when I was in France, they told me, oh, yeah, we have our mobile laser blinder, and then go up and blind these satellites and interrupt the power and damage them, I guess, the imagery sensors or something. So they have them, though it seems to me, if you got a satellite and looking down and you see this spot that they won't let you look at, well, that's telling you really better look at that with a UAV or something else, I don't think it kills the whole picture. I guess you could flow it and bloom it or something, the sensors. So I don't know much more to say, but they have sufficient resolution. They have the multispectral where they're detecting ancient cities in Saudi Arabia with these systems that have been underground for 1,000 years. I'm sure you can detect military systems very well too with the same thing. So that's a given. I'm not sure what you do about it. But yes, India has a bunch of imagery satellites. I am sure they're looking over Kashmir and, whatever. You just have to have them. And it just there's commercial companies that'll sell you imagery information and they have terminals all around the world. Though I bet you they restrict some of that. Like, oh, you can't get imagery information for the United States. I remember we analyzed that very much decades ago of like in Desert Storm, how the spot imagery system from France would affect us. And I am told I used to be best friends with the Navy commander who was in charge of intel on Schwarzkopf's staff during Desert Storm. And he said that General Schwarzkopf put the French special forces on the most vulnerable most of the left hook to assure that they would turn off their imagery satellites so the Iraqis couldn't see us doing it. So is that space warfare, diplomatic warfare, economic? There's many ways to do this kind of thing. So we sort of attacked French satellites, I guess you could say. So there's a lot of that is happening. And we even used satellite information pictures and gave them to students at the local university to plan how to attack the local base just as a test and how they can get on and all that. So yeah, we've done a lot of those things. We understand that. There used to be restrictions on resolution, but I don't think they exist anymore. So again, good luck. I don't know what you do about that. So it's, that could be good, that could be bad. I think how Ukraine attacked all those Russian bombers is because by maybe the SALT treaty, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, they had to have those bombers outside so we can count them with our imagery satellites. Make sure you don't have more than you're required to have. And they're saying, well, we want to get out of the SALT treaty now and put them underground. I don't know. There's all these. That's what people don't seem to understand is the consequences afterwards. Why are you attacking? How are you attacking? When are you attacking? And what are the consequences? And so I worked at the Air Force Research Lab here, and they just love the technologies, but not why you would use them. So I could fantasize and hope someone at the Pentagon is thinking this through a little better. But I think like most complex organizations, it doesn't get smarter, it gets dumber.
Speaking of US Space Force, which has been operational for several years now, what new command and control system has it implemented to maintain its space superiority and what challenges remain?
Well, I worked some of the original Space Command and Control, SPADOC 3. They did SPADOC 4. They just got rid of SPADOC 4, I think, or in the process of. They keep spending tens of millions of dollars developing new command and control systems, and for some reason they fail. I don't know what it takes. So that's what I saw a year or two ago. I don't know what they spent, I don't know, 10 years. I forget what the name of the program was. And some reason they just can't get it right. And then I guess the most important thing, if you're talking about ancient Greek warfare or futuristic warfare, is, knowing the situation, not only your adversary, but yourself. What's the status of your forces and all that. And that's so difficult in space because, again, it's so far away. Um, and that's why they put up all kinds of imagery satellites in space, so you're not worried about clouds and things like that. I mean, there's still a worldwide imagery sensors or radars the US has. They still have the best. And the Space Surveillance Network, SSN it was called, and that's still around. I think they've maybe added one or two sensors. They used to have a mobile command system, which is probably still around on that. So I can't claim to be an expert on that lately, what's all happening. But they seem to keep failing on it in one form or another. And it doesn't seem too terribly complicated to me. Well, in the old days, I mean, you're sensing the satellites. It's complicated to know what's going on, yes. But whatever they've been developing, you probably have to throw it all out with the AI now, and to be able to see the subtle things. Now, I invented software 15 years ago to sort of look at subtle clues of what's happening in space and figure out, is someone building up for an attack? But I would assume AI would get even better at that. And you can train it with all these past incidents and attacks. I've even theorized on the side here with my software, you can predict when a satellite is about to die before it dies. You probably can play the stock market. If $1 billion satellite dies from some commercial company, maybe, there would be stock consequences, and about it with publicly available information. They print all the information about satellites, the United Nations catalog and stuff like that. But beyond that, I don't really know what they're doing. I mean, it's all based there in Colorado Springs and Colorado, all the Space Force things. I think they moved a lot of that out of the Norridge Cheyenne Mountain Complex, and it's just sitting in buildings there at Schriever Air Force Base.
Thank you for bringing about the AI perspective, because my next question was about AI. How do you think advancement in artificial intelligence and data analytics improving threat assessment and real-time decision making in space operations?
Well, certainly, let's say operations, just day to day. I've heard things like years ago, you can test the oil of trucks and predict when the engine's going to fail. Okay, can't you predict when a satellite's going to fail with all these? Oh, it takes a little longer to turn the antenna, and it's a little squeaky, and it takes more amps to do it. I don't know, and you could, and I'm sure with AI, you could figure out we better launch a new satellite next year, or we better, I don't know, do something with it's facing the sun too much and overheating, and. So I'm sure operational wise that would be good. The other hand of operational is scheduling the satellites, scheduling, let's say, the ground radars, who should track whom. It's all manual, or was years ago. So the AI would help there. Certainly, I mentioned earlier, to be able to detect strange things happening in space. If you're smart enough, you should be able to figure out if they're building up to attack you in space. There's key jumping off points, certain orbits in space, that if you want to attack geosynchronous, there's one jumping off point, or LEO another, and it takes days and weeks to maneuver your satellites to those jumping off points for optimal attacks. And there's two ways you can attack. One is all these space weapons start maneuvering out at once, but it takes different times when they hit the targets, or they start maneuvering at different times to hit all their targets simultaneously. And so that's a problem you could solve with AI, I suppose, with normal algorithms today. But if you, let's say, you detect your normal day-to-day radars and optical sensors detect, oh, that's funny. This satellite looks and acts like a weather satellite. It's about the same size and mass, and its sensors are pointed towards the Earth and solar panels to the sun and all that. Suddenly now it's pointed a different way and in a different orbit. Okay, well, maybe it's dead. Or maybe it was some sort of secret weapon. But we're not going to get too worried about it today. And then tomorrow it's like, well, geez, it's getting kind of close to this other satellite. It's no longer sort of looking like a weather satellite, guys, you know. And oh, by the way, this other navigation satellite is no longer looking like a navigation satellite. And tomorrow there's five more, and it's all these different things. And you could have AI look at those orbits, look at the size of them, calculate how much time they've been in orbit already and how much fuel is left, and calculate how far they can maneuver and what are the potential target envelopes. And you could put together this three-dimensional map of all these envelopes and say, geez, they're all going against my very important missile warning satellite or something. We better do something about it. So I would think AI, hopefully they're smart enough to be thinking that through. I know they're, thinking about AI, but it doesn't mean they're doing it in a smart way. Because again, big systems aren't the smartest in the world. And the truly unique smart people in those big systems always get pushed down. I mean, that's just human nature, let's face it. So the AI for that, AI to, you wake up one morning and your satellite's dead. Okay. Was it solar flares that zapped it? Was there a micrometeorite storm? Was it human caused but unintentional? Somebody accidentally got close. These, natural orbital perturbations are always getting close and all that. Or was it human caused and intentional? Okay, we think it's that. 90% probability. Our AI helped us with that. Maybe they'll help us determine what the goal is, this attack, and let's say a few others. And you can be kind of childish and say, oh, we're at war with China. Obviously, they attacked. Well, maybe it's Russia or North Korea trying to stir the pot. Are you sure? Do you want to start a space war if you don't have confidence? And, I've been told by national authorities in Washington, D.C., now this was years ago, that if your satellite gets attacked, you have to tell us who the attacker is before we authorize you to counterattack. Well, that kind of makes sense. Well, they don't have big red stars painted on the side. You don't really know. How do you really know? It just broke. My computer broke last month. Did someone come in and zap it? I could be neurotic about it, but it's just, well, this shit happens. So space is very fuzzy. And again, that's good and bad. You can get away with a lot. You can't prove in a court of law, oh, he attacked my satellite. Here's the wreckage. Well, no, there's no wreckage. It's still there in orbit. It's not like you shoot down an airplane, you look at the wreckage, you see pieces of the missile and look at the serial number and stuff like that. It just stopped working, guys. And you can't really prove in a court of law who did it. So for what that's worth, and again, that's maybe good and bad, and I'm gonna go ahead. I'm thinking it now. The moon, China. That was one of your questions. And I've been in this business over 50 years. And I remember when I first started in the 1970s, and they're doing the NASA moon program, and they went to the Air Force and say, "Hey, Air Force, do you want a military base on the moon?" And the Air Force kind of scratched his head and is like, "Well, that's kind of far away. I guess not." And so my whole career, no one cared about the moon. Nobody ever cared about the moon until about 5, 7 years ago. And now they really care about the moon. And it's like, what exactly happened? And here in Albuquerque, I've personally met people who are starting companies to provide cell phone service on the moon. It's like, what are you talking about? 5 astronauts, $10,000 a minute charge. When are we going to have colonies on the moon that you need that? And they're putting up surveillance sensors on the dark side of the moon. The lab here, and it's like, what the hell is happening? Is there something that happened on the moon? Now, I could, conspiracy theorist, it's like aliens or whatever. But I theorize, and people have made fun of me for this, that we have this 1967 Outer Space Treaty that says you can't own celestial bodies. Well, I theorize that 10 minutes before China lands taconauts on the moon, they abrogate the treaty and say, we own the moon now, you know. And people say, no, 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 you can't. That's against the law. Well, they can just say, we're not part of that treaty anymore. And then a former NASA administrator said the same thing, on it. And I've heard even someone say the Chinese have admitted it. So I don't know if that's true. So maybe they're all worried about that. Though I think of it like Columbus discovering America and the Pope at the Vatican saying, okay, the whole Western Hemisphere, Spain owns this half and Portugal owns that half. And then I say, well, good luck defending that. Good luck defending the whole moon. You might claim you own it all. And all these European nations just started going over the Western Hemisphere and doing what they wanted anyway. Who knows? And then they talk about battles on the moon. There's a very good a series. I've seen parts of it about a different alternative history of the U.S. and Russia on the moon, and they're attacking each other and all. But I sort of theorized that, well, first of all, the space station. We got Russian cosmonauts up there who happen to be armed. And we've had all this bad stuff in Ukraine, yet they haven't gone shooting each other, and they keep sending people up and all that. And I think when you're in an environment that if you make just the slightest wrong move, everyone dies, and it's so desperate on the moon. I mean, I don't even know why you want to live there. The dust is horrible. The Apollo astronauts, they have a whole ladies in charge of moon dust at NASA. It's highly poisonous. It gets in everything. You've got all this radiation on the moon. You're going to have to live underground all your life. I mean, it sounds like an adventure for about a month or two. Then, but at any rate, so okay, a Chinese and an American colonies on the moon, which are probably 1,000 kilometers apart anyway. I mean, there's plenty of space there. Why would you attack each other? And a colony with hundreds or thousands of people, well, isn't that like 30, 40, 50 years from now, guys? And I think getting back to the China thing, all my life, I was taught to hate the Soviet Union. I worked in the military, la, la, la. And then when the Soviet Union collapsed, 91 or something like that, everyone looked around and said, oh, gee, we don't have any enemies. God, oh, China, we'll make them the enemy. I think I hear China has no landing ships. How are they going to attack Taiwan? It's 100 miles away. It's like D-Day was, I think the channel was 30 miles or something like that, and the only beaches you can land on, I think there's 2 or 3 beaches. There's cities right there, and how are you going to get through? It's like they're the enemy and they're going to be landing in California attacking us. It's like the this thing I was talking about, the Indo-Europeans, 90% of the battles, they just sort of like war. Maybe when I was younger, oh yeah, tough guy and all that. And then I get older, it's like, I don't understand anymore why these people are enemies. Now, you in India, yeah, the border disputes, and yeah, okay. Let me do one more thing while I'm remembering. I'm an old man. I got to do what I remember. Biggest threat from space. You're going to love this. It has to do with India. Biggest threat from space is FOBs, fractional orbital bombardment system. Those are hypervelocity weapons from space. Russia invented it in the 1960s. Go look it up. And what it was is America has all these radars up, in Alaska, and it's called a distant early warning dew line for missiles coming over the North Pole and, nuclear missiles. So Russia says, well, we're going to put these missiles in space and orbit and come from the south and do a surprise attack. And oh, by the way, it doesn't violate weapons of mass destruction in space because it's just a fractional orbit. How the lawyers will always do that. So that's 1960s technology. 3 or 4 years ago, the Chinese demonstrated their ability to do FOBs, and their stated reason was to take out American aircraft carriers. Now, think about it. anything coming from space, let me see if I get this right. I think it's Mach 22 or something like that. I mean, it's way beyond hypervelocity. And just falling down, guys, you're not particularly impulsing it. The Oreshnika hypervelocity missiles that the Russia used against Ukraine, supposedly they can go, I think, 400 feet underground. They don't have explosives. If a pound of TNT is equivalent to a pound of lead at 12,000 feet per second or something like that. So it melts the ground or something. So you have this slow moving aircraft carrier, Mach 22. It's a sitting duck, and it comes down, makes a 100-foot hole in your aircraft carrier. It hits the cold water, a huge steam explosion. It cuts it in half and sinks in minutes. Now, the United States is not a land power, it's a sea power. If one night, maybe tonight, China decided to take out all 12 American aircraft carriers from space, you're talking 1960s technology. Maybe you need a little bit of adjustment coming down, which, damn, if the Iranian hypervelocity weapons have been doing that the last few days. So again, we're not talking, high technology here. Suddenly, the US is no longer a superpower. Good luck marching 1 million men across the ocean to defend Europe if you have no aircraft carriers. Suddenly, China controls all the seas. All that oil in the Middle East is worthless if you can't ship it out. And suddenly, China starts charging anti-piracy fees or something like that for all shipping around the world because, space covers the world. If you're up there, you're the high ground, you can kill anything from up there with these hypervelocity weapons. And if you don't pay your fee, China would declare you a pirate and sink your ship. So everyone has to pay. What do you do about it? Well, everyone goes back to 500 plus years ago where sea power doesn't matter anymore, only land power. 1.4 billion Chinese, 1.4 billion Indians. Who could solve that problem? The only country on earth would be India if China really did that and took over the world, so to speak. So that's something where you really need to understand space. What if you had these weapons, these FOBs, they don't have to be terribly big, hidden inside satellites, dead satellites in space? You really need good situational awareness. Inspection satellites, can you inspect all of them? You get up close to them and you x-ray them or something? How do you know what's inside? So I don't know how to solve that. And there's no defense for the aircraft carriers. You have gravity against you. The FOBs are coming down freely. Gravity's making them come down fast. You shooting a missile up, oh man, you're going to get to Mach 22 like in 3 seconds. The gravity's working against you, guys. And oh, well, you shoot it and you break it up. Well, what have you done? Now all those pieces are still coming at you. Instead of 100-foot hole, you have 20 10-foot holes in your aircraft carrier. What have you done? The only thing that would defend you is like a nuclear explosion above you, maybe would work, and you just killed yourself anyway. So I don't know how you solve that. So, the times are changing. It's like the UAVs now are different. The hypersonic missiles are different. I don't know how the US screwed up not having hypersonic missiles. And Iran has them, China has them, Soviet Union has them. What the hell did we do wrong? So for what that's worth, okay, other questions.
That's a very interesting perspective, that you have about regarding the FOBS, fractional orbital weapon system.
Oh, I wrote a book on it too, a novel. I had an Indian ghostwriter, so that's out already. Falling Stars, Falling Empires.
I'll certainly ensure that we get a copy for our library. Speaking of other threats in space, today cybersecurity in space is a growing concern with recent reports of satellite hacking attempts, etc. What are the most pressing cyber threats to space assets and how can it be mitigated?
Well, first of all, I have my whole briefing, maybe some other time I'll show you, but in there I have a website that gives cyber attacks against satellites, hundreds since the 1960s. So the ones we know about. Cyber is the most popular technique. I worked the cyber weapons for 27 years because of concepts like plausible deniability. Electrons don't have serial numbers on it. Well, I didn't do it. kind of thing. Prove it. And then the thought that maybe you can't create space debris, though I'm sure you can screw it up where you really could make it fall apart or something. So the French told me about their cyber weapons for space. I heard Britain was developing them, and quite frankly, well, years ago, commercial satellites, their links weren't even encrypted. Let me tell you another story. The U.S., I can mathematically prove the U.S. attacked Russian GLONASS satellites in 2014. I can prove through the orbital dynamics and all. And the Russians got mad and they came and attacked the American banking system. 5 major banks in Manhattan were hacked. And that sort of, the war stopped because of that. A week later, everyone's at a negotiating table because they probably held back. It was like 60 million bank accounts and stock accounts. I held back and said, if you don't stop this Ukrainian thing, we'll release it to, hackers and stuff like that. So just one bank, Chase Manhattan Bank, spends $250 million a year in cybersecurity. That's just one of the 5 banks. And the Russians went through them like butter, hot knife and butter. So, and I've been, 33 years ago, I remember them showing me hyper hacks going through the electrical cord into your computer, or as a fire extinguisher on the wall. And I'm sure they're 1,000 times even better now. And so you can't sit there and say, and the first step to defeat is overconfidence. And you can't say, oh, well, I've got security. You can't hack it. So I think all satellites are vulnerable. What if somebody puts a code in there that they're not setting it up for until years later? Then they send some 2-bit signal to say, do it. And it makes the satellite start spinning wildly or something, and it becomes worthless, and it takes days to restabilize it, and the war's over with by then or whatever. What if you put cyber code in chips that are going to go into the satellite sooner or later? And people worry about this, but I think you're always going to get defeated sooner or later. Now, you only hope you're defeating the other guy even faster than he's defeating you. You only hope you're better organized, better technology, and you've got the timing right. You attack first. Maybe you're weaker because you're a Western power and you're a little squeamish about killing people, where some other countries, now I don't care, I don't care what my citizens care about who I killed or what I blew up. And so maybe it's a disadvantage morally. So cyber, yes, mobile cyber vans, yes, all kinds of sites around the world. You could have antennas on Navy ships. Last I checked, China had, I think, 12 of these space surveillance ships with the big antenna on them. There's probably more now. They're like billion-dollar ships. They have like lasers going along the deck to measure the amount of twist from the waves so they can counter with the antenna so they can keep track. And I'm sure with all those big ass antennas, there's all kinds of jamming or cyber or whatever you can do with that. And, I theorized you could I've heard years ago, the cyber weapons can be in a suitcase. Now you could put that on the roof of embassies around the world. Well, while you're at it, amateur astronomers, they buy these $20,000 automated telescopes that they put on mountains, and there's maybe 100 of them funded. Well, put those on top of the embassies too. Places where low cloud and all that, and you can do your own space surveillance surreptitiously, so to speak. And I guess cyber is the thing. Now, I'm sort of against it in one sense, and let me do a thought experiment. Let's say you're Ukrainians in a trench, and you hear the Russian tanks revving up at dawn to come attack you. And this egghead scientist shows up with this big black box with a big red button. He says, oh, this is a cyber weapon. You push that button, that will attack those tanks, and it'll stop them from attacking you. And I've been working for years on it in the lab, and it worked most of the time. And oh, by the way, I'm sorry, I used up all the budget with this, and I couldn't buy any bazookas, anti-tank, whatever. And oh, by the way, I'm out of here. And so the Russian tanks come at you. You push the button, and they go, and attacks their computers. And 30 seconds later, they reboot and come and kill you, and run you over and all that. So there's one thing I don't know about you, but as a guy, it's more emotionally satisfying to see a big flaming hole in the ground where the tank used to be, and you can say, "Yep, I did it," versus the cyber, the scientists say that it works. Maybe, but it's sort of like in World War II, turning the signs around on roads to confuse people. That helps confusion, but I don't think it's war winning. And it's easy to think about in space, but how do you know the target is not faking its death? You can't go up there and kick it and see if it's still alive. And then when the war comes and you say, "Oh yeah, we destroyed all these Russian satellites," and suddenly they come back alive again. You know, it just doesn't seem certain to me in one way or the other. But it's convenient. There's no blood, guts, and gore. You can be sitting in the command center outside Las Vegas playing video games with space, which to me, they ought to do a psychologic study. There's one thing to be a soldier on the ground and your buddy's head just got blown off and it's draped all over you and fighting and the emotional cost versus somebody on a UAV blowing up villages in Afghanistan versus somebody in a control center underground blowing up satellites and not killing anyone and like eating sandwiches at the time. And I mean, it's different kinds of war. And I sort of made fun of the Space Force the other day. I was talking to some Space Force guy, and he was telling the three um, values of the Space Force, and one of them was bravery. And I says, "Yeah, it's really brave to push that button." Really think about it. It's like, yeah, bravery's good, I guess. And then I could be sexist here. I definitely don't think women should be in the trench fighting, but they could be in an underground air conditioned shelter pushing buttons and satellites because it's not terribly emotionally demanding. Oh, another story. I'm sorry, I'm an old fogey. I have stories all over the place. During Desert Storm, I knew this Army space guy, and the space portion was run out of the Norwich Mountain Complex in Colorado. And he says he was in there, pushing buttons, so monitoring satellites and all that. And the Air Force people, when it came 5 o'clock, they just went home. It's like, and he's like, "Well, the war is 24/7, And it was just, and that worries me, the attitude of the Air Force. Another story. I've been to about 15 different military exercises. And one of the exercises, I told the colonel in charge to say, "Well, instead of attacking these terminals and the satellite terminals, why don't you blow up every single satellite terminal except lightly damage one of them purposely, so that 6 to 12 hours later you'll have repairmen coming in who are usually foreigners anyway." And you go in with anti-personnel weapons and take them out. They're more valuable than the equipment. And the colonel was aghast. "You're killing space personnel. Now there's a simulation." He says, "Well, thousands of people, Army people, die on the ground. What the hell are you talking about, guys?" So I keep getting to this point of attitude and culture. And yes, the Space Force keeps saying, "Oh yeah, we're killers now," and all this, but they're still all former Air Force people. So is it really there? Of course, maybe it doesn't matter if you're just playing video games. I've theorized too, what some country can do, maybe India, is put together a fun space warfare game. Realistic, not aliens and stuff like that. And you give it to people at the war college, and you say, "Play this game, very realistic, and every week, whoever wins the space battle, however you define it, you'll probably define it differently every week, we'll give you $100 prize." And there'd be these young minds who would go wild. And $100, 5,000 a year, who cares? Military budgets. And they would develop all the doctrine, strategy, and tactics you would ever need. And that's why you need the new minds on there. And oh, by the way, someday they're going to be a major or just a captain in a space center, and they'll see these funny things happening in space, and they'll go back and say, Joe Schmo beat me in the game 5 years ago. I know what's happening now. And he'd be so much more clever, I would think. And that's, what does it cost? A few $1,000,000 or that much to put together a video game? Have people who make video games already, do that and give it to them for free, and they'll do all the work for you with glee.
That's a very fascinating suggestion which you made regarding the wargaming. Space. Speaking of space war games, which are very, very crucial for strategic planning, have any new simulation techniques or scenarios have emerged recently that reflects the evolving dynamics between the space powers?
I haven't participated. I have at my own space war game. They're very poor at that when I was working directly with the government. They're doing more now. I mean, the Army invented, well, I have to go back. The Prussians invented the concept of wargaming, and the Army invented the concept of operations research. The Air Force wasn't very good at that, but then they put together, probably in the 70s and 80s, they had all these big Air Force games, and they would put a little bit in space in it. And I had trouble with when I would go to these military exercise games. Space was always kind of in the corner, and we would come in and say, hey, we need these Army tanks to go attack this space center, and take out the satellite. I said, why? Well, we don't have enough tanks to do that. We don't care. They didn't understand the importance of space on that. And then they had another game, I was told, that they finally had space in it, and the space people attacked the satellites, and everyone got upset because the game was over with. Nobody could do anything, without the satellites, and everyone just got mad at them and didn't invite them back. But I think they've gotten more sophisticated, and there is a big one that happens, I think, every quarter, and I sort of forget what it is, but they invite allies, maybe even India is part of it, and it's a week-long online space war game that they, you get satellites and you're attacking and this and that. See, the trouble is they're not thinking the bigger picture. Oh, you blew up this satellite. Well, so what? What was the impact on the battlefield? Can you prove it? And oh, by the way, did you run the game past surrender? What are the consequences diplomatically and so forth? And did you win the peace? You're not fighting the war, you're fighting the peace. And space is just sort of part of that, guys. And you sit there and you feel really good. You killed all those satellites, and did it affect the war on the ground? Can you prove it? I'm not sure how. I have software I designed to try to show the flow of information on the battlefield and how it helps the commanders on the ground. And if you take it out or delay it or spoof it, what the effects might be. But you can't mathematically model a human mind and say it's worth it one way or the other. So it's like a feel-good thing, I think, space warfare.
Just to intervene, are you referring to the Shriver Wargaming 2025? Because apparently India is not part of this war game.
India is part of that now?
No, India is not part of it. Shriver, India is not
good.
part of it.
Yeah, I haven't been to those for years. That's the big one. Used to be, I think, every 2 years. This is something separate. That's every 3 months. That's online and unclassified. I think it's Army related or something. But it seems to be good. And I'm sure there's others, because who are you playing with here? You've got the National Reconnaissance Office. In the Air Force, space weapons people never talk to them because they don't trust them. So they've got their satellites that I think are pretty important. How are they playing? Do they have their own weapons? CIA has their own satellites. Okay, Navy has their own satellites. I think maybe they all went over to the Space Force now, but maybe they're still controlling them. How does that all work together? And who exactly is in charge? And if, my simulations have shown, I have a space war software I had developed for me. My simulations have shown a major space war is over with in 24 to 48 hours. And what I did is I took 100 random satellites, space objects, and said match the orbits of another 100 random satellites. In other words, I guess attack them. And it's like 96% of them match those orbits within 24 hours with reasonable fuel. So a real space war, not like, oh, we're going to take out this one satellite just to show resolve, is over with before you can figure out who attacked you. And so you can self-deter if you believe that the United States government will tell you you can't counterattack until you know who attacked you. And, I have this book on satellite failures. Satellites die all the time, and they don't know why. And they take months to sort of assume this is what happened and this and that. Well, damn it, you self-deterred, the war's over with before you can even figure out what happened. And the other arrogance that I've seen in the Air Force and the Space Force is, oh, we know where all satellites are at. We see them launched and then, the mover and blah, blah, blah. And then you look at the actual catalog, which I download every 2 weeks. Well, used to. Up to 40% of them are called uncorrelated targets. We don't know who owns them and what they do. So shit. And, and they're not even trying to hide. I think a bunch of Russian satellites, commercial ones, since they're high latitude, they love the Molniya orbits. They're very difficult to track, and we lose them for years until the Russians announce them. And then my other theory, and all these are theories, but well, two theories. One, the easier one. Let's say you had a satellite that's 0-degree inclination and it's LEO. It's not geosynchronous. It's a couple hundred kilometers, 500 kilometers, I don't know. And it's going around. There's no space surveillance sensors would even detect it. Now, I say that because India had one years ago. I don't know for what, and I think it died and all of that. Now, I theorize another thing. There was a European satellite, I forget the name, but it was measuring the gravity around the Earth. It's a bumpy Earth, there's different things. And it was one of the first LEO satellites, very low Earth orbits. It was so low it had little stumpy wings on it. And they kept it up for 2.5 years or something like that. And what it would do, it was constantly electric thrusting. And so, okay, you can do that for 2.5 years. And that was, 7 or 8, 10 years ago. What if you had satellites that you really care about, and just before you start the war, you start electric thrusting? Well, they no longer follow Keplerian orbital dynamics. You don't know where they're at. And then, oh, by the way, you blow up a balloon around them and they have a different radar cross-section and optical cross-section. Or you just change the attitude of it, and it starts maneuvering. Even a little bit is enough to screw up the algorithms, and do it just for a few days. I mean, this other satellite did it for 2.5 years. What does it take, guys? Do it more impulsively, random this and that. I worked in a program that called Smart Attitude, and that is, you have a satellite. Most satellites are tracked optically. The radars go a couple thousand kilometers. That's it. You say you have this box. It's a satellite. The sun reflects off the side back to the Earth, and it looks bright. So you track it. Well, what if you tilted the box a certain way that all those solar reflectors go out into deep space? You're suddenly 18th magnitude, they proved. And, that's getting pretty damn hard. And you didn't even bother to paint it black. NASA, they have radar absorptive material, RAM. NASA a few years ago invented optical absorptive material where no light comes off of it, or hardly any. You do that with a smart attitude in a weird orbit, no one's going to find you. And this whole geosynchronous to the moon and, Lagrange points, no one's tracking up there. And if you're very dim, and if you're, let's say, at a Lagrange point, you're at the gravity equilibrium, you just touch it a little bit and push it down, and it comes screaming back down to geosynchronous, and you're not going to see it coming, if you want to really smash it, or if you just come by and do a electromagnetic pulse or something. Are we tracking those? And so you can sit here and arrogantly say, oh, we know everything in space. No, you don't. And okay, first step to defeat, guys, is overconfidence and arrogance, really.
Let me just ask you about the commercial space sector, led by companies like SpaceX and other private startups, which are booming. How do you think are these private players impacting space control policies and national security?
I don't really know how that works. Now, I go back to World War II again. Commercial, merchant marine, whatever ships, shipping ammunition to Britain and being sunk by German subs. Now, did the government compensate them for their ships, compensate them for the sailors who died? And so I don't know how this works. The commercial satellites, what is it, swap size, weight, and power, or something like that. And you're going to put on extra anti-jam capabilities or extra maneuvering capabilities, and who's paying for that? And who pays for it if somebody attacks it? And they have been attacked in the Ukrainian conflict. They put Russia put the first day of the war a cyber virus into Viasat satellites that the Ukrainians were used for communication, and it's like 5,000 windmills in Europe stopped working. I don't know who you sue for that. And then I have all sorts of maps of the GPS signal being jammed, and it's sort of like, well, idiots, what did you think would happen? You know, kind of thing. And then I have a theorized conceptualization. I think Elon Musk's Starlink satellites were attacked by Russia. Can't prove it, but suddenly, about a year after, he gave them for free. I love Elon, very imaginative, but the reason he's imaginative because he has a childlike mind, and that's why the childlike spat with his surrogate father, Trump, kind of thing. And so he says, "Oh, I'm going to play with army men and tin soldiers and go play this war in Ukraine." Well, about a year afterwards, it came out in the press that I saw pictures. They were putting the micro satellite terminals on missiles, or not. Well, maybe it was missiles and drones, and the Russians complained. And supposedly there was a conversation between Elon and Putin at that time. And Elon says, "Oh, okay, we're going to turn off that capability." Well, he knew what was happening. Now, I could show you at that time, a whole bunch of Starlink satellites started falling out of the sky, about 44 of them. And you can see the lines. And then again, governments are professional liars. They said, "Oh, it was a solar storm." Well, it wasn't a particularly big solar storm. And his satellites never flew out of the sky like that before in the bigger solar storms. And it made no technical sense. Even the meteorologic people said no, kind of thing. And then in subsequent months, I think he lost 400 or 500 of them. So I think Russia was attacking. And people have this simplistic mentality. Oh, you shoot a missile at every single one, so you need not only 5,000 missiles, maybe 10,000, because some of them don't get up there. Says, no, no, they're all interconnected. All you have to do is do a cyber attack in one of them. And, I've shown how I don't care if you're spending $250 million in cyber defense, the banks got attacked. You cannot defend against a country if you're a commercial entity. They're just too big and mean or whatever. And it's not like you can sue them and they're going to care. So I theorize things like the Starlink satellites detect that they're getting too close to each other and maneuver out of the way. Well, you could put a cyber code in there to put a negative sign instead of a positive sign. So when they detect too close, they'll start maneuvering closer and destroy them all. I'm sure that can be. And I don't care if some cyber expert says no, this or that. Humans get so clever when they're about to die, they can do anything, really. Now, another thing, the imagery satellites. What's the one company that's supporting the imagery satellites and giving the information to Ukraine? Maxar? Maxar.
Maxar Technologies.
Maxar. Well, gee, I used to be on the board of directors of Air Force Research Lab, and these are retired general officers and admirals and assistant secretaries of the Air Force, and Max, our vice president. And we went to dinner after our meeting, and I'm sitting there, bullshitting away, and I says, I'm surprised that the Russians haven't started blinding your Maxar satellites. And everyone around the table started giggling, which means they did. So for what that's worth, I can't prove it. There's a lot of shit happening in space, and you get away with it, and so that's why countries do it. And so commercial satellites, yep, they've been attacked. I don't know what the legal basis is. I suppose if you pay the commercial people enough money, they'll do anything, and they are going that way. That's I keep hearing it, and I'm sure there's a bunch all figured out, and all those the geoint you were talking about is very important information, just long term, not even during battles. But I wonder, well, any country on earth has smart enough hackers to develop their own cyber warfare. I don't care if you're Podunk, Bangladesh or something. There's some college somewhere. You have to have a little bit of intel, monitoring signals. And any school can put together a laser, high-powered laser. I bought on Amazon a 7.5 watt laser, a handheld laser that set my furniture on fire across the room. Well, you can get 1,000 watt lasers, commercial lasers that are cutting metal parts and all, and direct that up to space. And yeah, it'd be a little bit harder. You'd have to get a return signal, with a point and all that, but that's not beyond any country, So anyone can do space warfare. Space warfare also includes dropping a bomb on a Earth terminal, or cyber warfare against Earth terminals. And I mentioned, well, you got embassies around the world, put an antenna on top and do funny things. And is anyone going to complain? They can't go into your embassy. They're not going to throw a hand grenade at you, hopefully.
Thank you so much, sir. I think we have come to the end of the discussion. Thank you so much for your time and invaluable inputs. There's been a lot of takeaways in terms of geospatial intelligence, space situational awareness, China's space ambitions. You mentioned a lot about the US Space Force, including emerging powers in space control and surveillance, cyber threats in space and satellite control, including simulating conflict and wargaming space scenarios. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. A big thank you to our guest, Mr. Paul Semensky, for spending time with us and offering such invaluable insights despite his slight indisposition. Thank you so much, sir. To our audience, I hope you found the discussion insightful and thought-provoking. Thank you for tuning in and being a part of this conversation. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.
Thank you for your time. It's fun.